The viewing angle on these is okay, but it's not amazing. But I'm going to go into, oh wait, I got to plug this in. That would help. All right, so I'm in develop. And so I'm going to work through, most of y'all use Lightroom, so this all looks familiar to you. There's also, there's sky detection. It's going to be sometimes good, sometimes not good. With a night sky and a dark foreground, it's going to have trouble determining the sky, but you can see what it does. So if I go here and I click sky, let's see how. It did a pretty good job. It picked up the Iron Horse a little bit. I might go back and like have to tweak this and like kind of reduce the masking on the Iron Horse, but it did a reasonably good job. So what I'm going to do here first with the night sky, I might increase the exposure a touch. I'm definitely going to increase the contrast. I'm going to bring up the highlights a little bit. I'll come back later and reduce the highlights. This is light pollution from Greensboro down below. And so I'm going to reduce that later. But for right now, I'm going to bring that up the highlights. Shadows, bring those down. Whites, bring those up just a touch. Blacks, you can bring those down. Temperature. You don't typically want a real warm night sky. That's atypical. You kind of want to go more blue. You don't want to go real blue. You've probably seen something like this on Instagram before. It looks completely unnatural, right? So you don't want to go too blue, but you might want to kind of bring it to the left just a touch. And then sometimes people will go, oh yeah, just a little bit purple. So the tint, they'll go slightly to the right, okay? So I just did a night sky adjustment on my Milky Way. Next, I'm gonna create another mask, and this is the most important one you'll do for your whole edit, and that is a radial gradient where you're gonna do an oval, a long oval, just on the Milky Way. And so I drew that oval. I'm going to drag it onto the Milky Way, just like that. You can change the feathering of it as much as you want. Obviously, that's going to look very unnatural if I make that my edit because of that hard defined line. If I go to the right, it's not going to make too big of an impact. So I'm going to keep it kind of like right there. And now I'm just editing my Milky Way. And you can see if I bring my contrast up, look at how much it makes the Milky Way start to pop. So I'm going to bring my contrast up. I might bring my highlights a little brighter to brighten those stars a touch. I might bring my whites up there in the Milky Way. Shadows down just a touch. Come down here, I might add a little bit of purple to the Milky Way to give it kind of that color. Add a little bit of extra color to it. Come down. I don't usually do much of a curves adjustment, but you can mess with it and see if you like it. Like obviously this doesn't look too natural. It looks very washed. This makes it look very dark, but you can kind of make some little tweaks here to kind of make that Milky Way come alive a little bit more. And then here, adding some clarity and then also adding some dehaze really starts to make that Milky Way come alive. It's very subjective, and if you feel like you're starting to overcook it, and I feel like I'm right on the edge of maybe overcooking it where it starts to look extremely unnatural, well, what you can do is you can come back to the beginning of that mask and you can change the amount. So that's nothing, right? This is crazy, like never gonna happen. No, nobody would think that looks good, I would hope. So you got to find something in the middle. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to back it off, and I'm going to slowly bring it up until I'm reasonably happy with it. And my viewing angle is different than yours. That's not terrible. This is one of those where when you're done editing it, you're probably not really done editing it. Leave it up on the screen, leave the room, go get a cup of coffee, go do something, watch a TV show, come back in, look at it again. If something catches your eye, like a little too saturated, a little too much contrast, needs to be a little brighter, make that change. Because it's like, kind of like, you know, sometimes if you stare at a word for too long, you start to question if it's really a word. Does your brain ever do that, or am I just the weirdo that does it? So anyway, if you stare at this picture and you're editing and you're just engrossed in it, you get so used to it that you might end up oversaturating or doing something to it that starts to look really unnatural, but you think it looks good. And so that's why I recommend going away from it and returning when you have a fresh look at it. It's kind of left your brain, and seeing if anything looks a little bit weird to you. If it still looks good, then you probably are spot on with your edit. If not, keep tweaking it a little bit. If you want to go in and add a little of the color, so a lot of you seen, like, especially on Instagram, there's like these oranges and purples and stuff. That's there. Like, this is all part of the shot, the raw file. If I go, let me go ahead and accept that mask. If I go back to the original, that color is there. It's just I've kind of brought it out of the raw file. But if I want to add a little more color, I can go up here to my mask, and I can go to the brush tool, and I can go down and I can actually go to the color option, and I can add a little bit of like an orangish yellow. So I'm going to go kind of like that color right there, and I'm going to come out, change my brush size, and I'm going to start painting in just a little bit. Wherever I see anything that has a little bit of an orangish hue to it, and you can see how nice the pen is now. I'm just kind of dancing around, almost like I'm painting my picture. I'm adding a little bit of extra orange to that to kind of bring out that color. Here's the before and after. That's a really big difference to my Milky Way.
Big difference.
Yeah, I really think this is an important part of any Milky Way workshop, because if you just show people how to take pictures, they're going to be super and underwhelmed when they see what's on the back of their screen. Because on the back of your screen will be this at best, and maybe not even this, depending, of course, on all those other factors. But then when you bring it in and start your edits, it kind of comes to life. And if I want to start doing things with like the Iron Horse, when I took this picture, this was in 2020, Lightroom didn't even have some of these options. So I'm actually kind of curious from a personal perspective, like how well is it going to pick up the Iron Horse as a subject. I'm going to hit select subject. Did a pretty good job. And so I can increase the exposure. I can make the Iron Horse pop a little bit more, add a little contrast. I might add a little clarity to that Iron Horse. It didn't pick up the night sky in there. You can see the sky looks a little different there than here. So I'm going to have to go in and manually change that masking so that it all matches up. But it did a reasonably good job there. And so you can see I've enhanced the Iron Horse and the sky in this, and it doesn't look too terribly bad. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. I can come down, I can come down here to my colors, and I can change my hues around. What I really typically end up doing here, like usually the horizon is kind of yellow, I'll desaturate that a little bit. Also my greens of the grass, I might desaturate that so the grass isn't very, to me, the subject here is the Iron Horse and the sky. Anything else is more or less a distraction. And so I don't want the grass to be vibrant green. That's going to grab the eye. It's going to draw the eye down to the grass. Who cares about the grass, right? It's the sky. It's the Iron Horse. So I'm going to do things to kind of minimize the grass, maybe try to take the fence out if I can, what have you. And you can see this is actually one where I was starting to take the fence out. I had multiple iterations of this. So you can see where I was slowly trying to remove the fence, crop it out. I'm sure the newer versions would do a much better job than the software I had in 2020. But yeah, there we go. So this is it. I might actually try to burn this a little, because this is a little bright. This is catching light from the light painting. So I might actually go up and grab my brush again and bring down my exposure and bring down my shadows and come down and paint some underexposure right here to kind of keep that from grabbing the eye too much. And if I do it in a way that it starts to look unnatural, whoops, undo that. This is not an optimal editing setup, by the way. I've got it on my lap. So just for my own, just so you understand, I'm doing not the best job. I can adjust how much I've just done that. But you can see that's a little bit brighter than I want it. I'm going to darken it down. So I've brought the exposure down there to make sure it's not kind of grabbing the eye. And then when I'm all said and done, this is the before, this is the after. So I've done a pretty decent job of bringing that Milky Way to life. And what, 10 minutes? So if I spent an hour on it, I could go in and clean up all of the little issues with this image.
How would you go about getting rid of the white noise? The light noise?
Okay, so what I would do, this is actually pretty good. It does not have a whole lot of noise, but that's because
the light pollution.
The light pollution, yes. So what I would do is I'm going with this version of Lightroom. I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to go radial gradient. I'm going to see if this works. I'm just literally doing this on the fly in front of you. I'm going to go radial gradient down here. Bring my exposure down. Oops, not contrast. Pay no attention to the weird artifacts of that fence. I didn't realize I grabbed this image off my hard drive. This is one I was trying to get rid of the fence. So I've brought down that pretty well. I might actually, instead of it being yellow, I might go slightly more blue to help it blend with the sky above. I might also desaturate it a little bit because I'm getting some weird greens right there. So I might desaturate it just a touch, and now it just looks like kind of a dark gray sky. The only problem is I also did that edit to the Iron Horse, right? Well, let's see how well this does. I think this is going to work pretty well. I'm going to go up here to this mask. I'm going to subtract the subject, and there we go. Now I've removed the edit to the Iron Horse, but it has kept the edit to the sky behind the Iron Horse because I subtracted the Iron Horse subject. And so now I've got that back. And so I did a pretty good job there of reducing. It's not perfect, but again, I'm doing this pretty quickly for you all because if I get into the weeds and go in 100% zoom, I could spend 30 minutes on this edit. So anyway, before, after, this is what you can do. It's a raw file. Also, what I would definitely do with your images when you bring them in, before you send them to Photoshop or convert them to TIFFs or anything like that, go down here and hit denoise. Hit denoise in the new version of Lightroom. I can't denoise this because this is actually a stacked image. I stacked it, sent it to Photoshop. It's now a TIFF file. The denoise feature doesn't work with TIFF files. I don't know why, but it doesn't. It only works with the raw file from your camera. So denoise it first. It'll pull it up at 100%. You can adjust the amount of noise reduction. Look at the tinier stars, the stars that are out like in here, and adjust it so that it's not eating those stars and making them disappear, but the dark sky behind it, it's cleaning it up so it doesn't have those little dots all over it. And that's kind of the sweet spot. And once you've done that, you'll have cleaned up your sky pretty well, and then you can do all your edits. Other questions?
What was the name of the latest Lightroom that you were saying would do the denoise? What was
This is the very newest version. It just came out about a month ago. You always want to have a Lightroom Classic, not just regular Lightroom. You want Classic, which is like the non-cloud version.
That's what I've got.
Yeah. I don't know why.
So you wouldn't use this new
Here it is.
version?
Now they call it Adobe Photoshop Lightroom Classic. It is the most confusing thing from Adobe. I don't get it. There's two versions of Lightroom. One is like all these cloud features, but it strips away a lot of this functionality. They need to just call them two totally different names instead of both Lightroom because it's very, very...
You don't get it from Adobe?
Yes, it's from Adobe.
Oh, it is?
It is Adobe. Yes.
So this is a newer Lightroom Classics, what you're saying?
Yes,
They
it's
just
the, it
upgraded
came
it.
out.
Yeah, you can just do the update. The
Yeah,
update is
I
free.
had
the
in
update.
class with another
Okay.
soap
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, if
It
you
took
go to
about
just
6 weeks. So.
yeah, go to your Adobe, do the update, and you'll
Okay.
download the latest version. Yeah.
So you just take Lightroom Classic and update it, and they'll go to the newer one. Okay,
Yeah.
and I'll do
Yeah,
that.
it's
And that
up.
the noise is pretty good.
Yeah, it's up here. There it is. I'm not connected to the web, but
That's
if you
all
click
right.
up here, it'll show you your ones that are installed, and you can hit update next to Lightroom.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
do that then.
Other questions about this?
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I use mainly RAW.
Okay.
What would you get with that same image in JPEG?
It would fall apart a lot faster. So when I started editing like the Milky Way, it would get really noisy and like start to get a little pixelated. You wouldn't be able to push the colors as much, change the colors, change the color balance as far as the white balance being, there's just not as much data there for you to manipulate. So there, to me, with modern cameras and memory's cheap and everything, shoot JPEG of like your kids or grandkids, but not raw. Yeah, when it's something like this, you want to shoot raw because you just have more ability to change the exposure, bring the light out of the stars in the sky. And JPEG is a smaller file size; it's more compressed. It doesn't have all that data for you to manipulate, so it's just more limiting.
Are there any software out there that's doing AI with this with the?
I'm sure there is. I haven't gotten into the AI thing too much as far as creating content like skies and subjects. I know there's a lot of people that do it. So I'm sure there's an AI where you can just be like, create me a Milky Way, and it creates you a beautiful Milky Way. But to me, it kind of strips away the fun of going out and
fun of
finding a
that.
subject and taking the
I don't wanna do
picture
that.
and dealing with the weather conditions and all that, you know. But, you
And the
know,
bugs, you're right.
Yeah.
In the books.
I know, and I didn't bring bugs
unfortunately,
for
some people will be a little disingenuous and be like, I just captured the most beautiful Milky Way, you're not gonna believe this night I had, and really they just sat at their computer and like clicked generate a Milky Way for me. So but I could get on my soapbox about that for a long time, but I won't
blame you one
tonight.
bit.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's you don't get the memories and the fun of
No, you
just
don't.
creating something with AI.
I'm sure someone that shot the Milky Way can pretty much pick that out.
Yeah,
It's
true.